Little Otistov. It was the first section of the city that he'd called by a real name. Everything else was a sector, block, etc. Even their industrial parks were given numbers or the like. But here, he was standing in the lower sectors looking at a big sign that said, Little Otistov. It was crooked and fastened over the actual sign denoting the official name. But even that was new for him. Truth be told, as he glanced around the street that led into the block, he felt a little more homesick now than he had in ages. The strange, but certainly spicy smells were familiar in their strangeness. He could hear music drifting through the air, but for some reason couldn't identify the source. Back home, there were plenty of districts that had their own flair brought by the immigrants who lived there, and this was much like that. Unlike the other areas of the city where so often people were going to places or coming from them in a hurry. Here, people seemed to just sort of meander about. He noticed a sign pointing to a message office just over the bridge, which he wasn't familiar with, but he was more interested in the Xenos watching him. Most of the citizens didn't seem to have a care in the world, but he saw 3 on a street near a heavy lifter that could rather easily be driven into the street to block the bridge. There was also one in a window across the street from him. They weren't watching him with the curious eyes of a normal citizen either. He knew that look. They were sentries. Overall, he found it curious that these Xenos had a reputation for being more or less gypsies, but he'd never encountered them before. They looked like a mix of foxes and bears. They had the long bushy tails and triangular ears with colorful fur patterns, but they were bulkier and burlier than any fox, and seemed to have the ambling gait of a bear. They'd be trouble in close quarters, he figured. Looking at the Ermani in the window, he raised his pointer finger and his thumb, making a little finger gun before pretending to fire it. The figure shifted, and he could see something long, such as a long-patterned blaster perhaps, being set against a wall, and then the Xeno mimicked the gesture back at him. With that, he walked across, heading to the 3 sentries next to the heavy lift. They each shifted as he approached, and he could tell they were stashing weapons before moving away from the hiding spot. They weren't trying to be particularly sneaky about it. It was more like drunks keeping the brown bag on their booze. If the cops didn't have to give them shit about breaking the law, they likely wouldn't. Was that how it worked with the patrol here? Don't ask, don't tell? He hadn't known the Yervesh to make any deals like that. They were very strict about just about everything. Hello there, citizens. You know who I am? He glanced between the 3. The fat one he was going to call Fatty, and the one with the scar over his right eye he was going to call Scar, and the one in the middle, who the other 2 looked at, he was going to call Haas. Haas nodded. We know you, Shade. Vincent shook his head. No. You know of me. You don't know me. Haas snorted at that. True enough. What brings the Shade to Little Odistov? Last I checked, the patrol don't need a reason to walk through the streets of our fine city. Citizen. He stressed the word. You weren't suggesting I need your permission, were you? Haas stared at him for a moment and shook his head. Of course not. Then he shrugged. But there is no need for a patrol. No crimes have been called in. You know that. No crimes have been called in. Not that no crimes have been committed, or that this entire block is indeed crime-free, but that none have been called in. The Xeno didn't even blink. That's correct. None have been called in. The Yervesh don't bother us, we don't bother them with silly things. We are more than capable of taking care of ourselves. It was Vincent's turn to snort. He wasn't sure if he liked these Xenos or not. When a society like this could keep their shit in order, it meant less work for him. However, he was here to represent the law, and vigilantism was still illegal. But considering everything else going on around the city, he figured it might be better to let that sort of thing slide. You know why I'm here? Because the lower sectors are going to shit. But amid all that, this block is apparently crime-free. You can't tell me that the rest of the area isn't affecting you. Haas shook his head. No, of course it is. That's why we are here. And this, he patted the heavy lifter. And my sister's husband. He pointed across the street to the room Vincent knew the sniper was in. So not only do you guys not report your crimes, you don't report other people's crimes? That would be rude of us. The Xeno shrugged. Vincent laughed and shook his head. All right. Well, are you sure you don't have any of your own criminals? I looked into it, and there are all sorts of reports about Armani who run gambling dens, street games, and other little things that are in fact illegal. No, it's pronounced Urmani, not Ermani. The Xeno corrected him. Always is being mispronounced, and as for those things, we don't steal, if that's what you mean. A fool and his money are parted most easily. And we are no fools. Vincent laughed once more. Overall, these were some of the most interesting Xenos he'd met so far. A lot more enterprising than most. Perhaps why the others didn't trust them. All right. Well, in all the time I've been here, I've never visited your fine neck of the woods. He saw the questioning stares. To your part of town. Interesting that you call it our part of town. Careful, Vincent said evenly as he looked up at Haas. No matter who might be important in any part of town, no one is beyond my reach. This entire city is my domain. The Ermani nodded. True enough. I hear from the stories. It does me no good to simply take them at value of face. I decide for myself where the shade begins and the mortal ends. That as it may be, I'd like to browse your little Autostov. I might have the authority to kick down doors and go wherever I want. I also don't wish to tread on anyone's privacy without cause. He raised a finger. Don't think for a second that if I see something I truly don't like go down, I won't make an arrest. But this is your home, and I want to show proper respect by asking for a guide. The Xeno nodded. I appreciate this. I do trust you won't find anything to worry about, because we don't do that sort of thing here. This is, in fact, why we need things like this. He slapped the side of the heavy lifter again. You do know that you can call on patrol for help, right? The Xeno shook his head. If we call for help, but also expected the patrol to keep to themselves once we no longer needed, it does not work. Either we accept all, or nothing. Vincent didn't agree with the thinking, but he could understand it in a weird way. Right. Well, who's going to be my guide? Fatty or Scar? He looked between the other two Xenos, and saw their surprised expressions before Haas began to laugh at that, while Fatty then looked down and ran a hand over his bulk, as Scar ran a finger over his eye. I like these names. No, neither one. He whistled a note, and a younger, thinner Ermani came running from across the street. Vincent noticed that they had similar fur coloring, a dark orange with brown along the face and hands, much like the foxes he felt they partially resembled. This is my son, Genny. Say hello, Genny. Hello, Genny, the younger one said, as Haas reached over and rustled up Genny's hair. Such a smartass, this one. Genny, you will be a guide for our esteemed guest. Show him around wherever he wants. No door is locked for our visiting hero. Hero is a bit much, Vincent said. Fine. For our visiting pain-in-my-ass patrol who wants to snoop around in our business. I think I know where he gets the smartassery from, Vincent commented, which made Genny grin and Haas snort. I don't need two wives, Shade. Vincent extended his hand. Vincent. The Xeno eyed him for a moment, and then grabbed his forearm and gave it a pat with his other hand. Cove. Vincent nodded, then they released each other's forearm, and Vincent began to walk off with Genny. So, what's the message office? We don't like the computers watching us all the time, so sometimes we send letters, especially back from home. Vincent nodded slowly as he thought it over. It was hard to imagine people still using letters like that, especially in this city that liked to track everything. Did they have an old-style postal system? Did they read the letters? He didn't know. Then he thought it over and walked to the office. Inside, it looked like an old-time post office, just without the lines. A female Ermani sat behind the counter and glanced up, looking confused for a moment. Do you have any paper and pencils or pens I could have? She shrugged at that and pulled out a small box, which she handed over. Vincent opened the box and found a few sheets of paper, and both pencils and pens. How much? The woman looked at Genny. Who is this one? The Shade, here to look around. The woman shrugged once more and tossed up a hand. Keep it. We have plenty. He wasn't sure if this was some sort of minor bribe, or if she simply wondered why he didn't know they were free. If he asked, she might say it was a bribe, so instead he nodded. Thank you kindly, he said, and tucked the box into his jacket, hoping it wouldn't get ruined by a messy death. Then he walked back outside with Genny. It was interesting to hear the music. It sounded a bit like polka, but with something else to it. Electronic instruments or something he couldn't quite place. He wasn't exactly a fan of polka, but after a year of Xeno music that hurt his ears, he was willing to learn to like polka. Besides that, he liked whatever he was smelling. So, Genny, is this mostly what Armani do? He gestured around the street to the various people chatting and laughing as they walked or sat. Mostly they work shifts to support families. Some don't work. Some watch after us like my dad. When they are not on shift, they relax. We enjoy spending time together in the open. The younger Xeno shrugged. Some make easier money parting it from the fools above. Vincent chuckled as he heard the younger Xeno mimic the older. They were approaching a cart set up on the street that one of the nice smells was coming from, and Vincent saw something rotating above a small fire. He got excited. It was one of those big slabs of spiced mystery meat he used to get on gyros or kebabs. There was a woman and her child operating it, or he assumed it was her child. The woman was more bear than fox, which likely meant she enjoyed her own cooking, which was a good sign. Fuck, I've been dying for some kebabs. Your vesh food so often lacks that kind of flavor. What is kebab? The Xeno woman asked, and he pointed at the meat. Then she shook her head and waved her hand. No, not kebab, agara, she corrected. Vincent shrugged. I'll take some either way. You want agara? She looked at him with obvious surprise. The Armani child, who looked younger than Genny, started to pull some of the strips of meat off when she slapped it upside the head. You crazy! This important guest! Go get the good stuff! The child just glared up for a moment, before opening another drawer and pulling out slices of that spiced mystery meat that looked the exact same to Vincent, laid it out in what looked like a zebra-striped pita, before holding up a squeeze bottle of something orange. Sauce? Vincent asked, and the three Armani around him nodded. Sure, go for it. Now, if I know how it'll taste. Oh, which reminds me. He looked to Genny. Would your Vesh be able to eat this? His guide shrugged and made a face. I don't know. Well, can you eat your Vesh food? Once more he shrugged. What do you eat? Whatever my mother cooks. Or someone's mother, at least. Vincent chuckled, and it was his turn to shrug. Fuck it. If it kills me, I'll know not to eat it again. He took the offered food and bit into it. After a moment of chewing, he nodded and swallowed. That's good stuff. It tasted sort of like spiced lamb covered in peanut sauce. It wasn't a normal taste combination, but compared with the bland stuff he was used to, it was fantastic. It was also good to see he wasn't dying from anaphylactic shock yet. You like? The woman beamed down at him with a big smile, which got wider when Vincent nodded in reply. You tell your friends. Best agara and little Otterstov. I don't know about that, Genny muttered. You think I won't smack you good? You try insulting my agara again, you little ground kush! She huffed at him. Genny just shrugged. Vincent was too busy eating to laugh, but then jumped a bit when the woman suddenly smacked her child's shoulder and pointed. Go get it! We're low! Vincent turned to see one of the big city rats scurry down an alley. They weren't exactly the rats he was used to, but they honestly weren't too far off. The child quickly grabbed a club and ran into the alley in chase of the big rat. Vincent slowly stopped eating as he began to connect the dots, and then looked down the alley before pointing at his food. Agara? The big woman nodded at him with a smile. Don't worry, I don't give you the common stuff. Like I said, the good stuff for finest guest. Vincent looked blank for a moment as he let the information process, and then shrugged as he went back to eating. Living in a Xeno city had already taught him to give up on a lot of prejudices from home. Just as he thought about that, though, he began to feel guilty as he suddenly remembered one of the reasons this place reminded him of home. How often had he marched EE gray shirts into neighborhoods like this to make sure they didn't vote? These people weren't truly integrating into their new home. They were making their new home like the old. An idea he used to loathe. But here, he was honestly a stranger in this city, and he was only useful because of how he failed to adapt. The mistakes of his past almost made him regret ever remembering them. But if he didn't remember them, then he couldn't make up for them. He finished up the agara and smiled at the woman. How much? She shook her head in a hand. No, free. It was wonderful. Best food I've had in the city yet. You must let me pay. The woman turned away partly in what he thought might be a blush. No, you are guest. If you stop being guest, you start paying. But today, you certainly don't pay. Are you sure? I am sure, she said, and crossed her arms with a firm nod. Vincent felt prying further wouldn't be wise, so instead he nodded. Well, thank you for that wonderful agara. He contemplated his next steps. He had come here hoping to find out how they'd kept themselves out of the rise in crime, only to find that they'd basically closed their community to outsiders. They'd do well on their own, but they wouldn't be able to teach him anything about stopping the crime spree. He could wander around for a little, but he doubted he'd learn anything useful. But maybe just observing them would be helpful. He was already here. Making up his mind, he nodded at Genny. All right, kid. Show me little Odistov. The places I should see, the places that perhaps I shouldn't, but you know are interesting. All right. I'll make sure to point out all the places with better agara, he said, and as the lady behind the car tossed a set of tongs at him, he quickly ducked and scurried down the street, waving for Vincent to follow. Overall, the block seemed to fit Vincent's idea. They had their own clubs, bars, restaurants, stores, and even an unofficial school which was against several city regulations. But he didn't mind. They watched the paths into their block, and they kept to themselves. The edges of their block had less crime because no one wanted to deal with the Ermani. Would they protect more than their own? What if he got them more weapons and asked them to start spreading out? He couldn't imagine the shitstorm that would bring him from the council, but every person he could get to fight against the Felons was a person he was willing to use. He supposed it was sort of a matter of perspective. Many Ermani were likely felons of some sort, but they thought of it differently. They obviously didn't consider much of their activities to be illegal. Armed sentries, snipers, vigilantism, those were just ways to keep their neighborhoods safe. Perhaps encouraging vigilantes to fight crime was like fighting one dangerous animal with a different, slightly less dangerous animal and hoping the plan didn't backfire. He'd have to give it thought, but for now he planned on leaving the Ermani alone. He was going to ask Genny to guide him back the way he came, when he heard some sort of alarm. There was lots of clanging and he saw people rushing away from one of the bridges. Instinctively, Vincent drew his magnum and went running. As he got closer, he saw a heavy lifter blocking the bridge, and several Ermani, both men and women, spread out behind cover with blasters. Across the bridge, he almost couldn't believe what he was seeing. Roviks and the Howlers were moving in with their own weapons. It was nothing short of a fucking assault, it seemed. Open violence in the street. As he ran, he fired off a few rounds, watching a Howler's head snap back with a splash of crimson, before the advancing Felons began to duck for cover. He heard the crack of a long-patterned blaster, and saw another drop. The fighting began in earnest as the sides exchanged fire. It was more like an actual battle than any shootouts he'd been involved in. The Ermani were obviously experienced, but they lacked the equipment of the Urvesh, and they lacked the numbers of the advancing Felons. "The fuck is this?" Vincent asked an Ermani taking cover next to him. "They attack every so often. Wish to break us. We never break." The Ermani leaned up over cover, firing several rounds before ducking back. "I need to call this in. Get us some help." He reached up to his mask when he heard Kov. "No!" Vincent saw Kov, Fatty, and Scar ducking out of an alley to get to the building closest to the bridge. "No help. We take care of our own." "Kov, this is about more than just the Ermani. This is about the city. I will not let Felons just attack people in the open like this." "Neither will we." The Ermani kept up a steady fire, and Vincent could see the Felons weren't keen on rushing the bridge. Then he saw it. It was like some sort of junkyard assault walker heading down the street. It was crude, But the Ermani fire wasn't slowing it down, and from inside some firing slits, the felons were shooting back. He heard a few Ermani got hit, and noticed as it got close to the bridge, the felons began to rally around its legs for cover. "Come!" Kov barked, and Vincent thought the Ermani meant him for a moment, until Kov quickly vanished inside the nearby building with Fatty and Scar. Several seconds later, Kov popped up in a window with something on his shoulder. It took Vincent a moment to recognize a shaped improvised charge launcher, or sickle as he called them. There was a poof before a stream of smoke shot out, and something hit the walker, followed by an explosion. The walker staggered, but kept going, as the felons focused their fire on the window Kov had shot from. Before Vincent had time to worry, another poof came from a building on the other side of the bridge, hitting the walker from above. This time, the entire thing went up, and Vincent could hear the telltale pop of energy batteries cooking inside. There were screams, and the felons around the legs were on the ground, mostly on fire or dead. He watched the Ermani quickly press forward the advantage as they leapt over whatever cover they had, and began to sprint across the bridge. Some of the felons fired on them, but most were running at this point. Vincent quickly followed, overtaking the slower Ermani fairly easily. He couldn't lay down consistent fire with his magnum, since he had to keep hand-loading it, but every shot was a kill, unlike their blasters. Vincent was a little surprised at how quickly everything seemed to go. Either it was the adrenaline, or battles were much faster when one side knew how to shoot well. Soon, the Ermani were mercy-killing the burning felons, who were still alive, and Vincent was shaking his head as Kov crossed the bridge. "You see, we have it under control. How many attacks like that have there been?" "Several, but we handle it." "And those walkers?" He nodded at the burning husk, a little shocked still to see what the felons were using. This seemed to be significantly more tech than he'd ever seen, and more force than he'd ever seen them use. But maybe he was looking in the wrong places. "Only second time. We were ready for them, though." "How the hell do you guys keep all this quiet? The wreckage? The bodies?"
Turns out all maintenance personnel in the area are Ermani." "Who knew?"
Kov smirked and shrugged. Vincent had to reconsider not asking for their help. If they could pull this off with their limited resources, what could they do with actual funding? He was about to bring it up when he saw a figure down an alley. It was a satyr. Without waiting, Vincent began to sprint down the alley, and the satyr quickly turned and started to run from him. It was in grayish armor, not the black of the hit team in the chem lab, and not the silver of Mach's security forces. He could hear Kov shouting behind him, but the Ermani were soon left behind. They could fight, but they were lousy runners, it seemed. The figure ducked down another alley and slipped between boxes with the sort of ease that made Vincent suspect it knew the area well. Why was a satyr here? Were they leading the felons, or just watching? If it was watching, then why run from him? One day, he'd have no more questions and a lot of answers, and on that day, he'd be a happy man. But today clearly wasn't that day. He had chased the figure about a kilometer when he saw it suddenly duck into another alley and stop. Dead end. Vincent grinned and walked closer, before suddenly someone stepped out from behind a corner he didn't see and smashed a club into his chest. Vincent dropped backwards onto the ground hard, pain shooting through his chest, but he was already raising his magnum. 3 satyrs stood over him, one quickly kicking his magnum out of his hand. Vincent began to prepare for his death and curled up as they started to kick him. He hated being beat before getting killed. Why make him suffer? Just shoot him and let him wake up, damn it! He wanted to yell, but he was busy trying to protect his face. Then he heard a blaster go off and expected nothingness. Instead, the kicking stopped, and he heard running along with more blaster fire. Slowly, he pulled his hands away from his face and looked up. The satyrs were dragging one of their own into what had looked like a solid wall earlier, before the secret entrance quickly sealed shut. Vincent tried to get up and groaned as he began to feel all the pain shooting through his body. Cracked ribs for sure. Internal bleeding? Probably. They hadn't gone for his face, or else he'd checked to see if his teeth were all there. Not the worst beating he'd received, but it certainly fucking hurt. He looked up and then frowned as he saw a female howler step over him, wearing a modded hunting harness, blaster in hand. She knelt just past him, covering the door the satyr had escaped through.
Don't worry, Shade. We've got you.
He heard a voice that was familiar, but he couldn't place it, and then looked down the alley he'd come from, just as a female Vernek knelt next to him, pulling out some supplies from a medical harness. He smiled then. Hello, Karana. Perhaps he had more friends than he thought.